All right, good to see you. Let's get over to Esther chapter 8. Esther chapter 8. And we have a little bit of summation I want to do that we didn't get to in chapter 7, and then we will go right into 8. And plan is, Lord willing, next week we will finish Esther, and then we will get a head start on Zechariah. So I'm hoping you're excited about Zechariah. I think it will be a really great, edifying study. Not a book that is often dwelt upon very much by Christians, but something that is very, very important for us. Okay, so Esther, finishing up chapter 7 and giving a little summation here in the beginning. Let's just briefly talk about the story thus far. As you know, everything you cannot study Esther especially. Most books are like this, but you can't study Esther especially unless everything connects to the beginning of the story and the contrast to the end of the story. So everything started with a conflict that began when? When would you identify the beginning of the conflict? What conflict takes place? Yeah, well, okay, there's that conflict, but I mean like between Israel and just the whole thing with the Jewish business. When did that what actually triggered that?
Way back when the Israelites were attacked.
Okay, good. Yeah, so go way back in Exodus when they first got out of bondage. The first nation to come and attack them were the Amalekites, who came up behind them and struck down those who were weak. How about we stick with the actual story of Esther? Where's the trigger point? Mordecai refuses to bow to Haman. Everything just dominoes out of that. We have some setup and things like that, but everything, the conflict really begins at that particular point. The scene in chapter 7, verse 6 shows what? Haman doing what? Pardon? Going uh-oh. Yeah, and what does he actually do? He's terrified. You know what? I shouldn't have put 7 verse 6. I should put 7 verse 8. I'm sorry. My fault. What's he doing in 7:8? Yeah, he's bowing before Esther now. And before, he was mad because Mordecai wouldn't bow to him, and now he's bowing not only to a Jew, but he's bowing to a Jewish woman. So now you just watch the author here do this. See, the author's having fun, so to speak, as he's laying this out. And this is where you're seeing these cool things about reversal. This question comes up a lot of times in the study of Esther. Should Esther have granted Haman forgiveness? Should she have gone to his rescue as he fell upon her couch, and the king comes in and sees this and concludes that he's trying to attack her? Shouldn't have Esther said, whoa, that's not what he was doing. He was just pleading with me. It's okay. Should Esther have done that? Nope. Why shouldn't Esther have done that? Why was it right for her not to do that?
He had threatened her life.
Yeah, he threatened her life, the life of all the Jews, etc. Can you remember what Saul did when he was commanded to destroy all the Amalekites? What did he do? Yeah, this guy's an Agagite. Samuel was extremely angry that Saul did not kill Agag and sliced him to pieces, etc. because of it. God had given the decree that this, we'll get to this later in the class tonight, but God had given the decree that the memory of Amalek was to be blotted out from the face of the earth. And so you would have Esther being in the exact same position as Saul, and basically not fulfilling the promises that and the curse that God had given on that nation.
We can't think of Haman's attack or potential attack on Esther and other Jews as potential, and that he's now asking for forgiveness, and that can stop, because we know that in this culture, their government would not allow them to go back on that law. And so, even though he may be begging for forgiveness, there's actually this position between he and Esther where he can't undo the attack that he has triggered.
Right. This is like Esau wanting to go back and save himself from stealing the giving up his birthright and the blessing, and not being able to go back, as the Hebrew writer says, when he tried to go back, he couldn't fix it. And there's just things like that. That's exactly right. Here, by the way, here's an interesting rabbinical tradition. Agag slept with his wife one last time prior to the battle with Israel, and his death by the hands of Samuel. The son conceived, had a descendant generations later named Haman, who renewed the battle against Israel. So that is a Jewish tradition. Probably not true, but Jews tend to have a lot of traditions. But that's one way they went about to explain that you have Haman and Agagite after Agag had, of course, been killed way back then. Well, his wife was already pregnant. Of course, another explanation is the Amalekites were nomadic groups, and we do learn of Amalekites other than the ones that Saul killed. So there could still have been Amalekites, and could have still been family of Agag and all that that is going on. So just little quick heads up on that, just to give some explanation there. Some quick applications here about chapter 7, what you see so far. God has basically ordered life on earth, regardless of Jew, Gentile, Persian, Agagite, whatever. God has ordered life on earth so that divine justice is eventually executed. In other words, you can't continue to get away with bad things without it eventually coming back on your head. And you see that in Ecclesiastes, and you see that in Proverbs, and you see that just all the way through Scripture. God has just ordered life to where you continue down a path and the consequences are going to come back onto your head. And you basically see that there. Yeah, Wayne.
With the Canaanites being the prime example, it says when the
Sure.
time will come,
Right.
that he was sick of it. And I think any people can get there.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, God gave the Canaanites a period of time. He said their iniquity is not full at a certain point, and then their iniquity is full, and I'm done. And so there is just that natural divine justice that goes on. I think another important application through this with the downfall of Haman is that evil is deceptive, and it's deceptive especially to the person practicing it. And that's exactly, Haman has become so full of himself, his pride is so great, it's just blinded him. And he cannot really see how his actions are moving him toward his own destruction. So it's not just that this all happens and Esther does her thing and all that, but it's just that he's moving the bar right here. He's been moving it all away, and he doesn't even realize that everything he's done now has added up to his own destruction. Again, you're going to see that taught in Ecclesiastes. Check out Ecclesiastes chapter 10 sometime about wicked rulers and how they eventually remember some of those passages where he says nobody tears down a wall without maybe having a serpent bite you, or you don't wield an axe without something getting hurt. Anytime you use tools of destruction, the tendency is that you're putting yourself at risk. And so you see a similar thing going on. So very, very important principle, great principle for us to live by. You decide you're going to walk down a path of dishonesty or whatever it may be, a lack of integrity, and eventually it comes back on your own head. You're just pushing your own button, if you will, your own destruction button. Okay? Questions, comments? All right, wanted to kind of quickly summarize that and go on. All right, so chapter 8, short chapter, 17 verses here. Let's read through it quickly. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman. Of course, you remember that Mordecai saved his life, and he would have understood this. Which he had from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that's coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked." The king's scribes were summoned at that time, and in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews, to the satraps, to the governors, and to the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of the king, King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters to mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, and bred from the royal steed, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. On one day, throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree to every province, being publicly displayed to all people, and to the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swift steeds that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Susa the citadel. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and every province and every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday, and many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. Okay, by the way, just starting off as a big picture, anything reminiscent there? Anything sound the same? What sounds the same? Yes?
Basically, what had already been decreed, which is kind of opposite.
Okay, good. Yeah, it sounded all the same thing as when Haman gave a decree. all the steeds, all the things, all the going out, everything. So you could see this mirror image that is now on the other side of the mountain, so to speak, and a big reversal where now there's another edict and another decree, and all the same things fall into place just like had been earlier. So it is that kind of picture. You had a point, Julie? Or?
I was going to say the thing before that sounds the same, is that Esther goes before the king and risks her life again, evidently because he has to extend the statute.
Isn't that interesting? Yes. Yeah. The king is an enigma, without a doubt. But apparently, what you have here is simply this: the degree of discretion against the Jews still stood. And something has to be done to reverse it. And so even though he's had Haman killed and all of this, he sits back and fat and happy and serve me some wine, and Esther's going, hey, I got to do this all over again. And so she goes and she risks her life again, and the king again holds out the scepter and like, what's up? Hey, in case you didn't notice, the original decree is still standing. We got to do something here. Oh, sure. Well, here's my ring. Go right ahead. Do whatever you want to do. I need to get back to my wine, and whatever else that guy did. So something.
You ever wonder why Mordecai didn't do that? He was now trusted by the king.
Yeah. And as Haman, trusted by the king and the whole thing, but he didn't dare make the edict without saying to the king, can I do the edict? So you have, again, that same parallel. Mordecai didn't just say, well, I've been given the same thing, etc. Why don't I just act on my own? But even Haman didn't do that.
Why did not Mordecai approach the king instead of Esther?
Well, because she's cuter. Yeah, who knows? I don't know, Jim. It is interesting. He's a trusted advisor and everything, and Haman was able to walk in when he wanted. Why can't Mordecai? Yeah, who knows? Good point, Drew.
Maybe first two verses, this idea that the king gives Esther the house of Haman, and then she turns around and flips it and gives it to Mordecai. That's probably not talking about real estate, is it? Is that
I think, over real estate probably included, but over his whole, all of his holdings and everything that he had, and servants and who knows what. Yeah, I would guess. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's making me think a lot about how different the decree of the king is from like the decree of God, and that his words are just as binding and everlasting, but he doesn't have to go back. Actually, I didn't mean that. I got to fix that.
Yeah.
So he has the foresight, the foreknowledge that what he said at the beginning of time still stands.
Right. And in the case of God, he doesn't make a mistake and have to reverse it. He does reverse some things. So there is a parallel here in one way. God made a decree in Genesis that if you sin, you shall die. And man sins, and he goes, okay, you're going to die. And then you get to chapter 12, and he says, but I'm going to reverse the death penalty. And so he institutes another decree that through Abraham's offspring, all nations will be blessed, and actually makes it possible to legitimately reverse the decree. And so there is a similarity in that way, but it's not because of God's mistake, is it? It's because of man's mistake. Yes, Wayne.
I see the king's weakness in that he says, okay, you take it and write it the way you want to. And I think that's the way he runs the entire kingdom.
It pretty well sounds like it.
I'm so glad that the kingdom of God isn't that way. We have a set, you might want to do it your way,
Yeah.
Sorry, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, well, it's really true. I mean, you can't think of one thing the king thought up himself here in this whole story. Somebody obviously always influences him. So now look at the comparison again. As we've noticed, there's a comparison here between Haman's decree and Esther's decree. And you see in that comparison and even some contrast, you see a lot of identical words. There's one difference in these decrees. Anybody notice the difference in the decrees? Well, it might be even more than one.
Haman's people are allowed to target
Good. Yeah.
but Esther's people essentially have to wait.
Right.
And
Yeah, they
come
are.
after you with swords, you can get them, but you're not allowed to go.
Yeah. This is not an aggressive attack. This is a defense posture. You are allowed to defend yourself. So there you have this difference between Haman's decree is you can just go out and kill them and take everything they have. Esther's decree is not that way. You are allowed to defend yourself against the attacks, but you're not. There's no decree of going out and actually doing that. Did you notice the difference in where the decree, to whom the decree is sent?
Everybody in every language,
In every language, including whom?
that's Jews.
Including the Jews. So when you look at Haman's decree, it doesn't say anything about sending this decree to the Jews. It's just sent to everybody else. And so in this particular case, you have the Jews also informed of the decree that is taking place. Danny?
Well, also, doesn't Haman's decree say that all that plunder would be put back into the kings?
Yes, yes.
And that's not the case with this one.
No, they're not even, in fact, they're not going to take any plunder.
Yeah, it says repeatedly, they never touch the plunder.
That's right, never touch it.
They protected themselves from the people, but they didn't benefit from it.
Right, and we'll see that major difference when we get to chapter 9, when they actually defend themselves, and they will never take any plunder, and that, of course, says a lot right there in that big difference, no doubt. So now the contrast also. Remember what Mordecai did when he heard the first decree. Remember what he did?
He dressed in sackcloth.
Yeah, he dressed in sackcloth, ashes. He went about the city wailing and mourning, etc. Now this decree, you see the opposite? He's dressed in royal robes, is rejoicing and all that. So you see this complete reversal of how he's acting. I'm just, and again, anything major about that? Nothing major except to say, I want you to see the flow of the story. This is, you're learning how the author is telling his story. He's showing that complete reversal. This is, if you know anything about a chiasm, you can do a chiasm throughout the book of Esther where the last half of the book matches the first half of the book, and it's a tool that God uses in a lot of his writings in both Old and New Testaments. So there is a chiasm that takes place here as well. Now, do you notice this little part in verse 17, the very last verse? Many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. What's your evaluation of that? What do you think actually happened? They just go, "Hey, Jew, circumcise me quick. Make me a Jew." Another alternative to that?
Could have taken on symbology and associated themselves heavily with Jews.
Yeah.
I don't want to be mistaken for any of those other people. So
Yeah.
Give my stars to David, and, maybe a couple other thing or two. And
Right. Yeah, you get the feeling, especially with the word declared themselves to be Jews, that maybe they just all went, "Hey, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew too. Yep. By the way, our queen hid themselves that's all I was doing. Maybe that was it too. There could have been some of that, but at any rate, yeah, they jump in there because we don't want any part of this business.
That's another major reversal, right? I don't think anybody's outright saying they're a Jew
Yeah.
Haman's proclamation.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's going to jump in and go, hey, wait a minute, I'm a Jew. Exactly. So anyway, you see that, Jacob?
It's kind of interesting, though, because like you said, they're in the defensive position. Right?
They're what?
That's interesting, though, that point, because the Jews were in the defensive position,
Yeah.
so it's not like they were going to go out.
Yeah, they're taking a defensive posture, but there's a recognition here that the Jews have been empowered. And boy, they're in fear of what could happen, and certainly they had a right to fear. When you go back and when you later read 75,000 were killed.
I think this decree carries the weight of the king and that they can protect themselves without retribution.
Good point. That's right. They can protect themselves, and this has the weight of the king behind it and his decree. And so you don't want to be on the wrong side of this issue. Absolutely. So good point. Yes.
Interesting to think about that, though, because either side here, there is risk. Declare yourself a Jew, someone could say, okay,
Yeah.
and come after you. But
Come
then
after
you have
you.
the right to defend yourself along with the rest of the
That's right. They just apparently felt a little more comfortable.
And here's what I'm going with that.
Yeah.
And it was God that we've talked about, not mentioned in this book, but when Zeresh says to Haman, you won't prevail against Mordecai because
He's a Jew.
insinuating their God
right.
is more powerful than any God we have. And so I think the people recognize that, and that's what this says to me is that they felt safer aligning with the God of the Jews
Right.
than they did with any of the gods.
Yeah. Good point. Absolutely. And there's that, again, that subtle, unseen power that is behind the whole story. And that's an important picture. So verse 11, here is one of the things that a lot of commentators have struggled with. Destroy, kill, and annihilate, and children and women included. So I will give you just a heads up on this. There is a bit of an argument between translators as to how this should be translated. If you are reading American Standard Version, NIV, New Revised Standard Version, they translate it so it sounds like that if a Jew's children or women are attacked, then the Jew, including the men, of course, then the Jews can retaliate. But ESV and the others read it so that they can defend their lives, destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them. So they can give that, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. So the other side of the coin is he saying you can kill the women and children of those who attack you, or is it that you're talking about the Jewish women and children that are being attacked? Everything I read today and last week as well, I kept reading different things about this, is that most translators are in agreement that it is saying you can kill women and children, that of the families of those who would attack you. That is the sense of the Hebrew. The only reason some of the other translators took the other side is they had a little bit of bias. They didn't like the idea of a decree that would kill women and children. So here's the question. How would you, did I write this up here? Yeah. How would you justify this statement as rendered killing women and children? That the decree, if the decree is meaning killing the women and children, and somebody said to you, how would you justify that being okay in the decree? Ideas?
I see it as a little bit of deterrence. That one, women and children can be killed in the decree, the first decree. To be clear, this isn't like unique.
Yeah.
Second, I view it a little bit as, hey, the Jews are given the right to defend themselves. Barry, you need to know that if you go after my family,
It's not just you.
it's not just you,
That's
it's
right.
your whole family at risk.
Yeah, good point.
And again, the difference here is it's not like these letters were only sent to Jews, right? So everyone
Knows
everywhere
this.
knows that this is the situation, and it's not some sneak attack by the Jews.
That's right. Strong deterrence. Love that. Hadn't thought of that.
If we're saying that this is kind of a reversal of Saul's defeat of the Amalekites, I mean, that was in that story too, the completely wipe out your enemies. So there's kind of that
And
flavor
children.
here as well. If you're an enemy that you would attack, like we are wiping you out completely.
That's exactly right. So this is a parallel, and you mentioned something very important. Not only a parallel between the command given to Saul, but a parallel in the story to what Haman had decreed. His decree was to kill women and children as well. So there you have that parallel. So again, if you're looking at the story in total, trying to picture the reversals, that you see then that reversal. Belinda.
I can't help but think also about the situation today in the Middle East. It's been this way probably since Bible times. The women and children, they're not just usually innocent bystanders. And I'm not talking about 3-year-old children.
Right.
But by the time they get on up to be young teen, all you've got to do is look at the news. They're making homemade bombs. They can be dangerous too. I still see this in the context of defense.
Yeah.
It offends our sensitivities because we don't do that. But they do that.
That they do. And we've seen this in the latest skirmish with Hamas. Hamas has done that, hidden behind women and children and things like this. In Vietnam, my war, these poor soldiers over there, they had no idea if a 9-year-old was going to had a bomb on them or whatever. They had no idea who was really the enemy. It's one of the most difficult wars that you have to fight a lot of times, especially if you have some kind of morality about you. So yes, those are different things. Has God made decrees like this before? Sure. You have a precedent for this. Canaanites, kill all the men, women, and children. Don't leave anybody else alive. All to be destroyed. By the way, when somebody says, I just can't believe in a God who would have the children destroyed, they didn't do anything wrong. And my answer has always been, well, look at it from God's point of view instead of your point of view. And from God's point of view, He does not want those children to grow up and be like their parents and then be lost eternally. So He just takes them to be with Him. Because bottom line is, if He leaves these orphans alive, who knows what kind of hatred they would have or how much they've been influenced. As we know, an orphan can be influenced very, very young, very early in life, and so there would be things like that. But bottom line is, God knows best, and God is going to save these children, and that should be comforting to us. Yes, it's a sad, sad thing. All of it is very, very sad, but there is another way also of looking at this, is that these judgments are done. I'm going to get to this in a second, so I'll just wait on this. So here's some of the things I wrote down. Same decree as the Canaanites. I think you guys have hit all of these. By the way, it's unfair to insert the reading of this book, insert Christian principles or Christian agenda or Christian values into the book of Esther. Things change when you get to the New Testament. God does not give Christians the right to go out and conquer their enemy physically. So this is not the same thing. In the Old Testament, God's protecting His nation. Why is He protecting them? You got Jesus coming. That's right. You got the Messiah coming. He's protecting His nation to bring salvation to the whole world. So you have a different setup here than you do when you come to the New Testament and the kingdom of God in the New Testament. Literary structure, as we've said, allows this. Haman's decree included women and children. Esther's decree includes women and children. And I would suggest this too, that we think of this almost as a faith issue, but from Haman's point of view, I think it's more likely this is not a religious issue with Haman. And I think we've pretty well seen that through the book. There isn't any religiousness to this. It's an ethnic issue. And that's a lot of difference. I'm not, it's like Haman going, I'm persecuting you guys because you like to have a temple or you believe in one God or no, none of those things. He has an ethnic axe to grind against Israel. And of course we've read that background. We know that. Okay? So a few things like that I think are important. Also, if you read the original decree, 1 Samuel 15, I don't know do we have time to do that? Let's just hit these real quickly here. 1 Samuel 15, verse 2 and 3. We can skip that one. That one said just what we've all often said, but I'd like you to look at the Exodus text, Exodus 17. Look at Exodus 17 and look at the Deuteronomy text. Is pretty telling. So Exodus 17, notice beginning at verse 8 and then verse 14 through 16. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Okay, it looks down at 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, the Lord is my banner, saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now check out Deuteronomy's text on this. Similar kind of thing, Deuteronomy 25:17. Deuteronomy 25:17. And notice here, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary and cut off your tail, those who were lagging behind you and did not fear God. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies around you in the land that the Lord your God has given you for an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. That's pretty strong right there. God's just saying, don't you ever forget this. I want them blotted out from under heaven. So we're way over here in the time of Esther, and there's still an Amalekite. And Esther goes, cha-ching. Time to blot them out.
I think it shows that they were merciless people, because the people that lag behind are the weak, the children that just can't walk as fast. And
that's right.
They were terrible.
That's right. Yeah, and unprovoked. Just out of the blue, do this, and the thing of it is, God would have known too that the Amalekites, generation after generation, they never changed. They're not like, okay, all of a sudden we have a righteous nation, because we know what God would do if you had a repentant, righteous nation. We saw it in Nineveh. We've seen it many times. So it's not like God's going, I don't care what these children are like or how good they are, I'm going to destroy them anyway. That's not the situation, Adam.
But they didn't kill any women and children, did they?
Did they what?
They didn't kill any women and children, did they?
No, they didn't. That's right. In fact, I think I even put this up here. Major exception in Esther's Creed, we've talked about that. Jeremiah's original thing of live in peace with your neighbors and pray for them in the country where they are. In other words, there were no decrees that you go in, the diaspora is not to go out in these nations and just go, hey, let's just slaughter anybody who doesn't follow God or something like that. It's only a defensive thing. But you're right. When you get in, I know I have this up here, so, but we'll get to that just a second. Later Jewish writers, by the way, commonly called any of their enemies Amalekites or Agagites. So later Jewish writings after the book of Esther began to use the Amalekites and the Agagites as a name for any of their enemies. Now that's not dissimilar to what God has done. God refers in the book of Revelation to destroying Babylon. But in Revelation, Babylon is Rome. God uses Egypt as a perpetual enemy of his enemy. He uses Edom as a perpetual enemy of his. So it's not uncommon then, this is not something God specifically did, but the Jews took that and they talk about Amalekites and Agagites as anybody who would be their enemy and do like the Amalekites have done. It'd be just like us using a name and basically ascribing it to somebody because they act the same way, is the idea. All right, so in the New Testament, I wrote this down here. I'm in applications. How did that happen? So, say what you said again. Now I lost my train of thought.
Oh, in chapter 9, they don't actually kill him.
Exactly. And maybe I did not get that on the screen. And I think I just passed it somewhere. But yes, chapter 9, in verse 6, in Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And down in verse 12, he mentions again, they killed and destroyed 500 men. Verse 15, they killed 300 men in Susa. There's never a reference of killing any women and children. So, even if they were authorized to do so, there's no record that they actually did it. So, that side. Michael would like to lodge a formal complaint here.
We have examples, for example, feeding of some thousands, I can't remember which one, where they counted by men, but we know that women and children were there too.
And one of the accounts actually says besides women and children. But it does mention men, you're right. But these actually mentioned the men. These counts mention the men. Maybe there were women and children that also were killed, and it doesn't say that. I mean, when you get to it listing 75,000 in verse 16 of chapter 9, it doesn't use the word men. It says, got relief from their enemies and killed 75,000 of those who hated them. Could have been some women and children in that one. So, there you go. Don't have a problem with it either way. So, when we look at applications today, obviously, we cannot make a direct parallel, and we've mentioned why. Under Christ, Jesus now has taken the banner and the sword, and he's the one who makes war against his nation enemies. You would read this in Psalm 2, and you read it again here in Revelation 19, verse 11 through 16, where Jesus rides on his horse. His garment is splattered with blood, and he goes out and he is conquering his enemies. So this is not uncommon. Then Jesus is the warrior, so to speak. Book of Revelation, as we get through it, by the way, you're going to notice over and over again God's warlike pictures, warlike words. You will see that time and time again, but it is God who's doing the warring. And Christians, on the other hand, are conquering because of the word of their testimony, and they love not their lives to death. Never an authorization of something like the Crusades, a holy war or something like that. It's always been unfortunate that people use that to say, well, the Christians are no different than the Muslims. They've gone out and murdered people too. Well, you can call them Christians, but they certainly weren't to do such a silly thing as to try to call Israel, the land itself, as holy, for one thing, and then go and try to conquer. And then, of course, through the cross, Jesus is doing the opposite of conquering nations in the sense of destroying them. He's conquering nations now to gather them to himself. And that is repeated time and again throughout the prophets. You see it in Isaiah 13. You see it in Revelation 19, verse 15, where he conquers with a sword that comes out of his mouth. Word of God, he's conquering in that way. Wayne.
We see how nations try to ban Christianity because they're terrified of Christianity, true faith. In China, and places like that.
Well, and the reason...
The way he conquers it, he conquers their hearts.
At heart, yeah, and they misunderstand that in many ways. But the reason that communist countries and dictatorships have always hated Christians is because they know that Christians have one being that's higher than them. That's exactly the way Rome did. Rome was no different. Rome didn't care if you were a Christian as long as you worshiped all the gods. And one of the gods was them, was the emperors. So you could worship, yeah, they didn't care. But if you're going to say Jesus is Lord and he is above Rome, then that made all the difference in the world. That brought them there. So for Israel to destroy a nation was God's judgment against sin, just like the final judgment is. Remember, he's not attacking an ethnic type of attack or judgment. It is God destroying those who are sinful because he's protecting the innocent. You know, one of the great things about judgment, and we all should look forward to it, judgment protects the innocent. Judgment relieves the innocent. 2 Thessalonians mentions that. Don't have it up here, but 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 7 through 9, you have God relieving those who are righteous, and same will happen on the final day of judgment. Very good. Thank you. We'll look for this next week at chapter 9.